All right, here we're going to look at measurements and type measurements and even measuring space as well. And what I'm going to need here, I have my ruler, a very special ruler, that allows me to view in points. So each of these points each one of these individually is worth 2. So if I look at this a little carefully, 0 is obviously 0. But if I move up 1, 2, 3, I'm actually going to count by 2s. 2, 4, 6. So we see that middle line here is 6, 8, 10, 12. So each of these points, each of these lines is 2 points. So you'd actually count 2 times 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You just count by 2s all the way up. But these guides are here to help you 12, 24, 36, 48. So that's points. Now we use points to measure smaller spaces, which is usually type and strokes. And down here further, we use picas. This is the pica ruler. We use picas to help us measure a little bit larger spaces. Now, we can use picas to measure some type if the type is rather large, but still we usually refer to points when we are measuring. Now, if we're measuring something that is large, but isn't quite measuring, right in between the perfect amount, like say it's like 2 pica, but it's not quite making it to the 3, that's when we add in a point size. So we can say something can be 2, pica, let's see, that would be 6, because there's 12 points inside of 1 pica. So that halfway mark is a 6. So that'd be 2 pica, 6 point. If it's over a little bit more and I just can't quite get it, well, then I can measure the rest of that space using the points. So let's take a look at how that might work. So really, that's all I'm going to focus on is the point scale and the pica scale. So let's take a look at the very first one here. So this worksheet is given, and it's just a helpful guide of all the things that you should be measuring when you're measuring any type on a flyer, on a menu, on a poster, something that you have here, and you really want to nail down the exact measurements of everything, and maybe potentially you could help you recreate it in InDesign or Illustrator, whatever you choose. Now, what I'm going to look at first is type measurement, lowercase letters only, and yes, we measure them in points. Calculate point size by measuring from the top of an ascender to the bottom of the descender. So as I look right here, I see I have a ascender, which is the top of the B, the top of the H, and I also have a descender, which is the bottom of the P. So to measure the proper point size, I have to measure the very top of an ascender and the bottom of the descender, and that gives me the whole type size. So what I did here, I made a box around it. So really that's all you have to do is measure the box, the height of the box. So if I come in a little bit closer, and don't mind my head if it's in the way. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 points. But remember, each of these counts as 2. So roughly that would be potentially a 10-point type size. That's it. Now I have a bit of a smaller point size here. So what I've done, once again, the top of the L, which is the ascender, and the bottom of the G, which is a descender. Let's measure this entire blue box that I've made and see what we find. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. So each of those is worth 2. So that's going to be roughly an 8 point. That's how we measure. Now, a bit of an issue. Right now, these 2 lines actually have ascenders and descenders. But look at this line here. It does not. It only has an X height. There's no ascender, there's no descender on this line or this line. So what I have to do is measure the X height. So type measurement, lowercase letters, X height only. That means I cannot find ascenders or descenders. Calculate the point size by measuring the X height and then multiplying by 3. What we're saying is the X height counts for 1/3 of the type size. Usually, now saying, I shouldn't even say usually. Different typefaces do different things. Sometimes they have very short ascenders and short descenders. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, exaggerated. So what we can do is just measure the X height, and this is going to give us a rough idea of what it will look like. So once again, I'm going to sneak in, line it up, 1, 2, 3. So I have about a 6 point. So if that's 6 point, well, multiplied by 3. So this roughly might be an 18-point type. This one right here. Let's measure the smaller one here now. This is even smaller. Remember, no ascenders or descenders. 1, 2, not quite 3, so it may have been 2.5, but let's just say 2 for now. So it's 2 point times 3. So maybe we'll say that's roughly 6 point. But I know it's a little bit bigger, so it might be like an 8 point, but roughly this is where we're at right now. Okay? So that's where I'm at, and that looks pretty good. All right. So if I continue on, and now I've done my type measurement sizes with my ascender and descenders, and if I just only have an X height. Now what I can do is look at now if I only have capital letters. So I don't have any ascender, descender, or X height. I just have capital letters. So what can I do with that? Well, there's a little bit of a formula we have to follow. Capital letters are usually 2/3 of the point size and slightly shorter than the ascender. So the cap height is actually a little bit shorter and the ascender goes a little bit higher, usually. Measure the height of the capital letters. That's what we'll do. And then we'll divide it in half. And then we'll multiply this by 3. So let's try that out. So I'm going to just measure this normally, this box, because there's no ascenders, descenders. I'm going to measure the height. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 8 point. And then what I'll do, I'm going to divide that in half. Well, 8 divided by 2 is 4. Multiplied by 3 equals 12. So this roughly is 12 point. That's it. That's how we do it. Let's do it again with this bottom type here. 1, 2, 3. So let's say 6 point. Divided by 2 equals 3 times 3 equals 9 point roughly. That's only when we see all capital letters, all uppercase letters, and we cannot see any ascenders or descenders or X height. So if I have all caps, that's how I use that formula. That's when I use the formula. All right, moving on. The leading. The leading is the vertical space between multiple lines of type. It is measured from baseline to baseline. So I have the bottom, I have these 2 lines here, and the bottom of this baseline here, let me even draw it out. I know I put the box there to help me. Okay, that line and this bottom line of this line. So the 2 baselines. So the space in between this baseline and that baseline, that's the height I'm going to measure using my type size. And what do I find? I find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which multiplied by 2, because each one is worth 2. So that's about a 12 point leading. That's it. That's how you do it, from baseline to baseline. So if I wanted to find the leading from this baseline and this baseline, say, I'd make a line and I'd measure the distance here. If I wanted to find the leading from here to here, well, I'd measure this baseline, which I have there, to this baseline, and I could measure the height of that using points. So that's how leading works. Now you have to measure all the leading. Leading from here to here, here to here, here to here, and here to here. And hopefully if something is consistent enough, you'll be able to keep it consistent. I measured this, well, it must be the same as this, and so on and so on and so on. So hopefully that stays true in some of your designs. But if you do notice a larger space in between that doesn't seem normal, like what you've already measured, well, measure that too, and it's very simple to do. The next part we see is column size. Column size. Now, columns are a part of the grid where content is placed. Grids are made of rows and columns. Columns run up and down vertically. However, we must measure the columns with the type and the spaces between the columns, called the gutter, this pink area here, width and height. So let's just measure the height for now. Sorry, the width. So now I notice that this area is a little bit larger, and it even tells me that I should probably measure this in picas because it's much bigger. If I measured it in points, well, look how long that is. And that's almost 144 points. Well, that's not bad, but ideally, if it was even larger, I would have to use picas. So I'm going to use picas now anyways to give me an idea of how long that is. So right now, then my pica ruler now, same idea. I'm going to measure from here to here. Let's see what that does. So I see all the way. It goes right roughly about 12 pica. So picas are now represented with just a P. So you noticed before I was doing a PT. The short form for points is PT, and I kind of measured that up here, measured in points, PT, and larger spaces are measured in P, just picas. So it's just a 12 pica across. Okay, let's also measure this other blue area. I'll get to the gutter in just a second. So what I've noticed here, if I go all the way across from this blue to this blue here, And so right now the column width of this column is 12 pica. And I go all the way across here. I see it's roughly 14 pica. Now that's a rough, because there's a little bit that goes over. So I could put 14 pica, but I know that there's a little bit left over. So what I could do, I can make a little mark, and this is where we start to put the picas and the points together. If I make a little mark, and then I measure the leftover space, I might see that it's a 12 pica, maybe 1, maybe 2. I'm gonna say 1, so that's worth 2 points. So it's a 14 pica 2 point. Now I don't have to put the PT here. That's normally not what we do. We just do 14 pica 2, which means 14 picas plus an extra 2 points. So it gives us a little bit closer, accurate measurement, which is really, really great. So that's kind of how that works. Let's measure now this pink area, the gutter between the 2 columns. Okay, what do I have here? Oh, I see. This is not going to be a perfectly round number. So it goes maybe about to 3.5. Now I know the half mark is 6 points because there are 12 points inside of 1 pica. So that halfway mark is a 3 pica 6. Even if I eyeball it and add a little bit extra, say, okay, maybe 7, maybe 8. So I could potentially say this is let's just do 3. I'm going to put it right in here. This is fine. 3 pica. And now because I have that little measurement there, I'm actually just going to go up to the 3 mark. I'm not even going to worry about that half mark. 3 pica. Now I'm going to measure the rest using points. And what I'll find is 2, 4, 6, 8. So it's about 8 pica, which makes sense. 8 points. So it's 3 pica 8, meaning 3 picas plus another 8 points. That's it. Now we can measure the height. Now I do want to measure the height using picas. So once again, I see it's about 3 pica. That's actually really, really close. I'm just happy with 3 pica. And that's what the height of it is. That's it. So 12 pica for this width, 14 pica 2 for this width, 3 pica 8 for this width, and 3 pica all together for the entire height. And that's how we measure columns using picas. Page size measurement. So what I've done is I put in these little crop marks to help us understand how we're going to measure the entire page. So you could have a piece of paper, like I think it goes up to here, and then you can measure it and say, this is the dimension of the entire sheet. So what we do, we're going to use picas again. So I'm going to measure from down here to up here and then across, and I'm going to get my height and my width. Now, normally it's width over height, but I'm going to start with the height here, which is totally fine. And we can see, I'm going to move this over just a little bit. We can see that I have my line here and there, and I'm just going to measure from this line to this line, and roughly I'm seeing about 66 pica. That's it. Back over so we can see those crop marks. And now I'm also going to see this picas across. So I'm going to go from this line to this line, and let's see what we get here. So it's 66 pica, by 51. So I can even do it by 51 pica. That's it. So from down and across, now obviously this would be the same and this would be the same. The widths are the same. So now I know this is a 66. Actually, you know what? I actually don't like doing it that way. I'm going to reverse that. I'm not a fan. I always do width over height. So it's 51 pica by 66 pica. I always do width over height. That's usually the standard we see in the industry, and I want to keep it that way. It's very, very helpful to know the first number usually is the width, not the height. If someone says it's a 5 by 8, well, it should be a 5 width by an 8 height. The first number is usually the width. All right, moving on. What I want to see now, I've done my picas. Now I want to look at the margin measurement. So the margin is the area between the edge of the paper and the start of the content. So I've kind of already laid that out for you here with these little green marks. And I showed you kind of like this green mark there. So this green mark and this green mark and here and here. Well, I'm going to measure them. I'm going to measure them using, well, it says picas. Now, if they're very small, of course, we could use points. But right now, I'm just going to use the pica ruler and see where I'm going to start with this top one here. And I see that it's roughly 3 pica. Okay, done. I see over here, let's measure this one using pica. Yeah, seeing 3 pica. So when I go into my program and I start recreating this, I know that roughly my margins on the top and left and right are going to be 3 pica. Now this one here is a little bit bigger, so it's roughly, let's look. It's 4, but it goes over a little bit. So it's going to be 4 pica, and I'm going to bring in my points and say maybe about 1 point. So it's going to be 2 points. So 4 pica 2. All right. So remember, 1 line counts as 2. So maybe that's 4 pica 2. That's it. That's how we do it. Now, once again, my measurements can be slightly off. The points are very hard to read. Let me bring it up a little bit closer again, see if I can get it in focus. There we go. The picas are very small. They're hard to read. So look at my finger here. That is very difficult. Look how big my finger is compared to those tiny little points. So it's going to be very difficult to see those tiny little points, but we try our best. Imagine if each one was a point. There'd be even more lines in here hard to see. But each line, I should say, is worth 2 points because they're just so small. So hopefully this will help us measure tighter spaces, but more accurately. Tab alignment. So we look at, sometimes when we see prices, maybe they're tabbed over certain tabs or certain alignments in general. Well, right now you can see my entire page here is left aligned. Everything's left aligned and right ragged, meaning the left side is aligned to one area, to one line, and the right side is ragged, meaning it's not justified. It doesn't go perfectly to the next line. It actually is ragged and it stops wherever it needs to stop. So that's how this is. However, when we're looking at prices, maybe we can see if they're going to be left aligned, center aligned, or right aligned. So look at tab structure and choose how it is aligned, right? Justified, left justified, center justified. So this is the type, and then here are the prices that coordinate with that. Now, obviously the prices are off. I used 4 digits just so I could show you how things are aligned. So we can see that everything is aligned here. That means it's aligned to the left. We can see here, everything is aligned in the center. So that means it's aligned center. And we can see that this is aligned, everything is aligned to the right-hand side. So therefore, this is right aligned. Now, there is another option where you could actually have decimals. And you could have many numbers, 4, 8, 6, 3, 2, 0, 0, 1, 8, 8. But the decimal stays aligned. So the alignment actually happens here. We could do this in design. And one of my other other information is 1.36. Well, no matter what, the decimal will always be the inline element, the element that it's aligned to. So all the information goes up this way and this way, but really normally we don't see that too often, especially on menus. We normally see a left alignment, center alignment, or right alignment, but usually more often than not, we see the right alignment. All right, moving on. Now, the strokes. We usually do see strokes or rules inside of design. It helps us separate areas. It helps contain areas. It's a really, really great tool to use. I use it all the time. Stroke weight measurement points. Measure the weight, thickness of the different strokes. Now we could use this. We could actually use the points to do this. So I can say, well, this is like, I don't know, maybe like a 1 point, like this only one line. That's tough. I'm going to show you a little trick later. This one we can say is maybe 1, 2. So maybe that's like a 4 point, maybe. And this one here we could say roughly is a 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. So maybe I'd say that's an 8 point, maybe 8 point or 10 point. But there is another part to this ruler that is pretty great. And what it does, it allows me to measure the points. So right now I actually have this area here. Let me show you, bring it up, and let's get this into focus. Right there. So I have my points. I have a hairline point, half point, 1 point, 2 point. Those are normal point sizes that we see, but let's bring it down here and let's see. Well, it's not quite hairline. Hairline's even thinner, but I'd say that's maybe, well, a little less than 1 point. Maybe it's 1 point. I'm going to say half a point. So it's 0.5 point, this one here. This one, and I'm going to try to measure. No, not quite there, not quite there. Maybe about a 4 point. Oh, and I actually did put 4 points. So I measured it accurately, and this also helped me see it's 4 point. Now this one here, the thicker one, let's see. Yeah, it's about 10 point. Oh, I was off, but I said it might be 8 or 10 point, but it is 10 point, which is great. So that's another way to help us measure strokes. If we see a stroke, like, oh, how thick is that? Well, we can measure it here, or we can measure it here using the points as well. All right, a few more. Actually, one more, really. This is just extra. The color picker. So sometimes we see colors on a menu, like, oh, that's a lovely color. I'd love to know what that is. Well, here what we could do, we can bring out our Pantone book. Now, I'm choosing the Color Bridge Uncoded. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the way we do it is we tried to find that green that works. Okay, and now, ideally, when we look at the Pantone, let me try to bring this up here. We see that the Pantone, we're looking on the left-hand side. The left-hand side is the actual Pantone, the ready-made ink. And the right-hand side is the CMYK version of that, or the processed. So meaning this is made up of tiny little dots of C, M, Y, and K. This is not. This is a pre-mixed ink that was already made. So it's not made up of tiny little dots of C, M, Y, K. It actually is a pre-mixed flat ink. It's called a solid color. And that's why they call it solid color. Or a spot color. That's the color. That is a pre-made ink. So that is the exact color you're going to get. So this is the truest form of this color is in this book. So as I go to that green, I start to see, I'm kind of off a little bit. I'm getting a little closer when I go here. Okay, maybe a little darker. Maybe I need to go darker. That's pretty close. I'm actually just going to write it down. I know I can go darker, but I'm just going to write down the code, which is 369U. Now I know 369U is the code, and the U means it's from the uncoded book. If it were from the coded book, that would be a C. Now, some people like to use the process color. Oh, it's closer, it's the P. I don't want you using the process color. It's the uncoded book, but it's the process version of that. No, I want the actual pre-mixed ink, the solid color. The solid color is the correct color to use. So what I need to do, I need to find maybe a little bit darker of that green. So can I find a darker version of that? I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I'm kind of getting away from the greens and going into that. Can I find a darker value? That's still, oh, that's really close. Yeah, it's the same one, 369U, but I still feel it can go a little bit darker. Can I find it? Can I not? No. But you know what? We could always come close, and we could always revisit and try to find it and see where we're at. So, okay, we're going to, oh, that looks pretty good too. A little bit darker, a little bit lighter. That looks pretty good. So let's even try that one too. 2424U. Let's just say we're happy with that. Now, what I would do normally is do the rest of them, but you get the idea of how I try to match that color. So I have a 369U or 2424U, but at least it gives me an idea of what that color might be. But remember, this is a little tricky where I have sunlight coming in, I have other light bulbs showing and giving me different lights, and this might not be as true as it really is, but my Pantone book will give me the truest value, what I currently see, and it's not too bad, all right? So that'll give us at least an idea of where I might be, and I could fine-tune it in my design if I need to. Now, the last part of this is the typefaces used. Now, you generally it'd be very difficult to know which typefaces were used on the flyer or the menu or whatever you're looking at. You're like, how? I can't tell what that typeface is. So there are a few tools available to find typefaces used. So there is a couple new tools in Illustrator. It's called Retype. Now, I don't mind this tool, and currently, while I'm making this video, Retype is not bad. It's not great. What it does is you could put a raster graphic inside of Illustrator, and it will recognize the type, and it'll give you suggestions of what that typeface might be. It's not bad, and hopefully it's only getting better. But it doesn't really, I don't believe it borrows from all of the different type foundries and resources. I believe it only borrows from your library, maybe your system, which might be your font book, and of course, what Adobe has, the Adobe fonts. So I'm not too sure exactly where it pulls from, but it's not all of them. So the other option is myfonts.com pages, or if you just Google what the font, you could take a picture. So if I just took a picture of this with my phone, say I took a picture of the word margins, and then I uploaded that online and sent it to this website, it would give me a close indication of what other typefaces, or what it might be, and other ones that are similar to it. So that's not a bad idea either. However, if you do have a PDF of the design, if it's a menu, business card, a flyer, whatever, you could potentially go into Adobe Acrobat, go into File, and then Document Properties. And then if you show fonts, it should help you recognize the fonts that are a part of that design. So there's a few different ways to find out what the typeface is. Maybe you're just naturally good and gifted at understanding typefaces and what makes up a decent typeface. But ideally, you want to be able to recognize typefaces. But if you can't, you can use these tools, Retype in Illustrator, what the font, or of course in Adobe Acrobat, to help you figure out what these typefaces might be. Either way, this is how we measure type and measure space inside of the design that might help us figure out ways to lay out different elements on design, but also mainly the main focus here is to help us distinguish and understand relationships between a 10-point and an 8-point, or the leading, or different column sizes and margins. Like, oh, I really like that spacing. What is it? So it's the relationships between the spaces, between the measurements that are very important, because now you could look at something and be like, oh yeah, that's probably like roughly like an 8 or maybe 9 point type. And you would recognize that and have a better understanding of design foundationally, which will help you design better and understand design in general better. So I hope this helps with the measurements. And if you measure this ruler, obviously I'm going to lay it down here. I'm just going to put it over here so we can see a little better. This ruler is a great ruler using our strokes, our picas, our points, but there also is another option here using capital letters. So you could kind of measure the cap, like say I want to match that E, but even if there's no E, it's okay. You could measure other ones. So I'd say it's roughly about a 24 point using this measure. But if I didn't have any E's in here, I'm just measuring the height, the top and the bottom. So that kind of helps me here too. The other one we have here, obviously we have our inches, our imperial system of inches, which I use a lot of. And we do have this leading gauge, which I really don't love. It's also a way to say how we can look from baseline to baseline. So I can measure the line. Well, this is actually far too big. So I'd have to use this idea here. So let's say I have a baseline here and a baseline here. So I'm going to use that line to that line. What this gauge in the middle is trying to show me, let's say right here. I'm trying to find that height roughly. What this gauge does, it allows me to kind of find the space roughly. That's kind of close. So roughly it's like almost like a 15 point lead between here and there. Actually probably closer to 16. So it's trying to help me find the heights. Like each of these is an individual height that only gets bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller. And it's like from here's 11 point. Anything after that is a little bit more than 11 point, getting to 12 point. You can kind of see these thicker lines. Let me bring it over here. You see these thicker lines. Anything between here and here is like a 12 point. Anything between this line and this line is 11 point. So it's another way to gauge leading, but I just don't love using it. I just prefer measuring in points, and that gives it maybe a little more accurate. This potentially is a little bit quicker, but I feel it's a little less accurate, but it does do a good job, quickly, which is not bad. So this is how the ruler works. This is how we measure. This is what we measure. And I hope this helps.